Welcome everyone to this fourth module of the Disabled Youth Training for Leadership run by the Commonwealth Disabled People's Forum. I hope you've managed to get a break over the holiday period. We didn't have any events in December, so now we're back to this. And as you'll find out, we're changing the seminar pattern, but you'll be told about that. I'd like very much, this module is about democracy and disabled people's organisations and the full range of how we can look at those issues. And I'd like to introduce Skada Louis, our treasurer of the Commonwealth Disabled People's Forum, from the Federation of Disabled Organisations in Malawi, and she's also works in the Human Rights Commission in Malawi. So over and is as an expert on a lot of these things. So welcome, Skada, and over to you.
Thank you, Richard. So introduction to Module 4, Democracy and Disabled People's Organizations. We as humans face threats, an unequal world where the gap between the rich and the poor is widening both between countries and within countries, where multinational corporations often operate for their profits alone, where the urgent need to seriously tackle human-led climate change is being talked out, where increasingly autocratic political leaders choose competition, confrontation, and war rather than peace and collaboration. This means that we live in the most global and stable period since the Second World War. We do not have increased opportunities, while colonialism has been replaced by a far greater number of national states who have generally supported a rules-based international order. Far more people, both as a percentage and in total, live outside poverty. Globally, more young people, especially girls, have access to education. Health provision has massively improved. Despite these and other important gains for humanity, the threats and opportunities both make implementation of human rights much more difficult, especially for traditionally marginalized groups such as disabled people. Without a rules-based democratic system, the chances of implementing our human rights as disabled people are lessened, and as standards of health, education, and living improve without full implementation of disabled people's rights, gaps between disabled and non-disabled will increase due to stigma, discrimination, and lack of reasonable accommodations. In this module, we will unpack the principles of democracy, its link to human rights, the rule of law, and freedom of information, and how these relate to disabled people achieving our human rights in practice. These principles are laid out in both Commonwealth Charter and the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights and subsequent charters. One of the unifying forces that hold the Commonwealth together is a commitment to this approach when dealing with civil and political rights. This has led to various members being temporarily or permanently excluded from the Commonwealth for breaches of these principles. Currently, Gabon for not following free and fair elections, previously the Maldives, Fiji for coups, or Zimbabwe on a longer-term basis. But despite all but one of the 56 Commonwealth countries, Tonga, have ratified the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. The aspirations contained in this legally binding treaty are as far away as ever from being implemented at the grassroots level for the majority of the 450 million disabled citizens of the Commonwealth. The process that led to the formation of the UNCRPD 2006 started more than 30 years prior, when disabled people began to view themselves as human rights holders rather than objects. Essential to this process was the transformation of organizations representing disabled people from moving from charitable organizations set for us by the non-disabled world to self-representation and empowerment with our own organizations run and controlled by disabled people. The importance of developing an ever-wide range and diversity of disabled people in our organizations we covered in Module 3. In Module 4, we will examine the ways we can make our decisions in ways we can make our decision making as inclusive, representative, and democratic as possible. In doing this, we strive to represent the diversity of disabled people, our wishes and aspirations as the fundamental change motto in all our countries. The General Secretary of the United Nations, on his guidance notes on democracy 2015, says, democracy based on the rule of law is ultimately a means to achieve international peace and security, economic and social progress and development, and respect for human rights. The 3 pillars of the United Nations mission are set forth in the Charter of the UN. Democratic principles are woven throughout the normative fabric of the United Nations. Indeed, the first 3 words of the Charter itself are, we the peoples, followed closely thereafter by important references to the essential democratic underpinnings such as human rights, fundamental freedoms, the equal rights of women and men, life in larger freedom, self-determination, and the removal of distinctions on the basis of race, sex, language, or religion, or disability. The General Assembly in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights elaborated on the general human rights provisions of the Charter, including the obligations of the non-discrimination, equality before law, freedom of movement, thought, opinion, information, expression, assembly, and association, recognized as rights necessary for democracy. The declaration contains explicit provisions declaring that the will of the people shall be the basis of authority of government. This will shall be expressed in periodic and genuine elections, which shall be by universal and equal suffrage, and shall be held by secret vote or by equivalent free voting procedures, and guaranteeing everyone the right to take part in government of his country directly or through freely chosen representatives, and the right of equal access to public service. In our organizations, if our organizations are to be representative, and we claim them to be in line with points 4.3 and 33.3 of the UNCRPD, we must make every effort to represent wider layers of empowered disabled people. We'll also look at how our organizations can maximize the development and accountability of leaders in our movement. However, to ensure democracy, as laid out in the quote from the Secretary General of the UN, we must also examine how we can enhance the participation of disabled people in general political process, both in voting and as being representatives at every level of the system. Article 29, participation in political and public life. So I represent the Federation of Disability Organizations in Malawi. And we are an umbrella body of disabled people's organizations in Malawi. Structurally, the organization has 11 affiliates, different disabled people's organizations from diverse groups. And we have a board of directors, and we also have a national executive council. So the board provides oversight of the work that the Federation does, while the National Executive Council is comprised of representatives of leaders from the affiliates or the DPOs that are affiliated to FEDOMA. In terms of how we ensure that our members' views are incorporated and included in the decisions that the organization is making, is that because the National Executive Council has a representation from DPOs, it means the decisions that are made by the National Executive Council in collaboration with the board incorporates the views and the thoughts of the people that the DPO leaders are representing. In addition to that, we ensure that the selection of the board members and also the selection of the National Executive Council is done at the General Assembly, where we allow members to come together and make decisions on how they want the organization to be led and to function. As an organization, we are intentional in ensuring that the views and the decisions that the organization is making are also including women, disabled women, and the youth. This is demonstrated even in the selection of leadership of the organization, both at the board level and also the National Executive Council, where there's equal representation of women, acknowledging the double discrimination that women face. In terms of youth, we also ensure that youth are part of the leadership team, not only at the National Executive Council level, but also at the secretariat where the day-to-day administration and management of the organization is done. The organization operates on values and principles borrowed from what the UNCRPD is providing, ensuring that there is non-discrimination within the federation, but also the movement, equality, and also respect in terms of the views of diverse groups of disabled people that the organization works with and serves. In terms of the key issues that we are campaigning, there are a lot of issues that we are campaigning. As Malawi, the disability movement has made a lot of progress. Recently, we saw Parliament passing the Persons with Disabilities bill that has been outstanding for the last 5 years, replacing some old bills that we had, and that contained discriminatory languages and other things that are not in line with the UNCRPD provisions. So currently we are advocating much for inclusive electoral processes, I think in line with Module 4 also, because Malawi is going for general elections in 2025. And this year and part of next year, there will be a lot of campaigns that politicians will be making, including the president. So we are advocating to ensure that the electoral processes, starting from the registration up to the actual voting process, are inclusive. But also we are encouraging disabled people that are interested to join politics to do so, and also link them with appropriate groups, civil society organizations that can support them to represent other disabled people. Currently in Parliament, we only have one person with disability who is a member of Parliament, and he is someone with albinism. But we would want in 2025 to see more disabled people get to Parliament and be part of the decisions that are being made. In Malawi, we still have archaic discriminatory laws around participation in fair elections. For example, though our Constitution Section 40 is providing for political rights for all, but the Local Government Election Act is denying participation of people with psychosocial disabilities being denied the right to vote and stand for election. So even last week in the papers, this has been one of the things that the disability movement is fighting for, to make sure that in the upcoming elections, people even with psychosocial disabilities are allowed to participate and stand for elections. Lastly, for me, I think it's high time we added inclusive to the word democracy. Democracy itself, because I was thinking as I was preparing for this that my own definition of inclusive democracy would be removing all undue barriers to allow every citizen to engage in the civic and political discourse. And it means ensuring that the political decisions or the political decision tables reflects the diversity and the voices of all citizens. So until that is achieved, I think democracy will still be a far-fetched dream, especially for countries that are way behind in ensuring equal participation of citizens, particularly those who are disabled.
Hi everyone, I'm Rasanjali Padrage, President of Disability Organisation Joint Front in Sri Lanka. I'm Executive Committee member of Commonwealth Disability Forum. The Disability Organisation Joint Front is an umbrella body of organizations of persons with disabilities and established in 2001. DOJ consists of 36 member organizations spread across the country representing all categories of disabilities, namely physical, hearing, visual and intellectual disabilities. The DOJP is registered as Disabled People's Organization at National Secretariat for Persons with Disabilities, which is the national apex body on disability, which functions under the Ministry of Social Empowerment. The DOJP is mandated and aims to work jointly as a group advocating for the protection and promotion of the rights of persons with disabilities, ensuring them a barrier-free, independent life with equity and dignity. Our executive committee is transparent and giving opportunity for each type of disability to represent as President and Secretary General for every 2 years. Also, we had provided opportunity for each type of persons with disability as Vice President in our Executive Committee. We also joined together for all our advocacy and lobbying on rights of persons with disability. At the same time, we also give respective memberships and opportunities for women with disabilities. Executive Committee members are selected from the organization of and for persons with disabilities who are members at the DOJ. We have quarterly executive committee meeting and we discuss and take decisions, collaborate. Project staff implement the decisions and update the progress during the quarterly meeting. We conduct international independent audit and evaluation. Recommendations from evaluation and audits are adapted to improve our service and implementation. Our finance is very much transparent and access to any member organizations. We take decision during an emergency through the management committee, which includes the President, Secretary General, Treasurer and 2 Vice Presidents. Management committee meets every month and evaluate the progress of the actions planned during the executive committee meeting. We have women with disability and youth with disability representation. There are 5 out of 17 members are women. We are advocating and lobbying the rights of persons with disabilities. We support the government to formulate the Parliament caucus on inclusion of persons with disability, and we represent the National Council for Persons with Disability, which is the highest decision-making body on disability issues in the country. We believe that the concept of nothing about us without us, no one left behind, inclusion makes positive changes. Thank you very much. Have a nice day to you all.
Scatter gives us a really good start to our considerations of this. What we're going to be looking at really in a number of issues. First of all, drawing actually on Disability Awareness in Action's guidance, organizational resource kit number 4 and number 2, which they produced nearly 30 years ago when they were building the disability movement, particularly DPI, but other organizations around the world, which really led to the large number of DPOs that were actually able to come to New York and to help shape the convention. And so there was a lot of work there to see what sorts of organizations do actually help to develop disabled people's movement. First of all, stage 1, characterizing different forms of organization. Disabled people are often isolated from each other and the world, locked in institutions, segregated by inaccessible housing, hidden away by their families who are ashamed and frightened of them. Stage 2 might be sometimes as a result of being managed in groups by medical and other rehabilitation professionals sometimes due to families of disabled people forming an organization, groups of people with similar or the same impairment begin to come together. And the history of the movement tells us that blind and deaf people's organizations came together first, and others much later, and at all different scales. The third sort of level is that different people with different impairments begin to realize that they have certain things in common. And then that develops to a fourth stage where single impairment and issue organizations begin to join together to change attitudes, laws, policies, and services. And they use their votes and money and their friends, using the media and so on, to begin to change the attitudes in society. At stage 5, change comes more rapidly. Community is more aware of disabled people, see them on the streets, at work, in the media, television. Programs and policies change, legislation is passed in some countries. Technology advances, and so aids and appliances are more readily available. Stage 6 can often be a move back from that, where despite positive changes, there are problems and new dangers, particularly related to technology and to research, and for instance, genetic engineering, trying to eradicate disabled people, to change them, for instance, genetic counseling to try and get rid of fetuses who have an extra chromosome or other conditions, and a sort of purifying the race approach, which can creep in even as in the guise of high tech. We have to be on our guard against that. And then a stage 7, which I don't think we've really got to yet, the future. And there, remember, people are writing this 30 years ago. Worldwide disability movement grows in strength. More and more disabled people free themselves from despair, segregation, decide to work together in local groups at the national, regional, and international levels, and most importantly, at the local level. They look at the ways their groups are organized and make improvements to draw in more disabled people, improve systems of communication, reach those who are hard to reach, and present a united front to government so that there are very few choices for them in terms of where they want to go. And the first activity you'll be asked to do, which we'll talk about in the seminars, is what stage do you think you are in at your country when you look at these? And that might be quite a useful thing. The key change really is how we make decisions collectively, how we involve more disabled people, and how we can impact change amongst the wider non-disabled society. It seems to me that the 7 stages take us more into a historical view and might be more useful to you at this time. But I think those 13 points are worth thinking about. For too long, non-disabled people have made decisions about our lives. In the last few decades, disabled people have found the strength and confidence to say, we need to speak for ourselves. Make decisions about our lives because we are the experts when it comes to disability. By forming organizations, we show that we are not people to be pitied, but people with rights, skills, and duties who demand a place within our community. So going back to module 1, it is an essential part of the transition from being an object to a subject, from being medical charity model to the human rights social model approach. And the organizations need to form in such a way that that is foremost in what they are about. So a second activity might be what your criteria for characterizing a disability organization might be and why. So some of the key ones which are important to think about are self-determination and independent living. Choices and rights have been a key issue, and particularly independent living, let's be quite clear, and it's covered in the convention under Article 19, and in many cultures, people don't live on their own. They live in large family groups, in communities, in villages, and so on. That's fine. It's not about that. Independent living is not about doing everything for yourself. It is about self-determination, having control over what happens to you. It is having the right and opportunity to follow a course of action and choices. And that's the most important thing. Barriers to independent living include lack of accessible environments, housing, education, employment, lack of recognition and respect, accessibility. But it's also about having self-motivation and self-confidence, as we talked about in module 2 and 3 particularly. These principles run through the UNCRPD and are particularly apparent in Article 12, equal recognition before the law, which looks in some detail at people being assisted to take decisions, and in Article 19, living independently and in the community. In setting up a DPO, you have to decide the organization's basic aims and guiding principles. These should involve everybody who wants to take part, and clearly the founders are going to be a smaller group than as it grows and extends to cover a wider and wider range of people who define themselves as disabled people. You may have to adjust what those aims are, and that's why there has to be annual or regular accountabilities. Remember the equal opportunities that we looked at in module 2, that this is an essential element of all the building blocks of building your DPO and having regard to that. And in doing that, you need to think about the participation of the people, and particularly the barriers that we identified for access and from cultural prejudice, such as against women, girls, and ethnic minorities, different castes or tribal groups within your country, so that those are broken down and everybody can participate. And that doesn't mean doing things in a normative way. It means being creative and working out how to provide the information so that everybody understands the essential things they need to do so they can be part of decision making.
I'm Moha Pal, Chairperson, Access Bangladesh Foundation. The aim of our DPOs is Access Bangladesh Foundation. It is a national leading organization established in 2008. In terms of our organization structure, we have a dedicated 9 members executive committee with 6 persons with disabilities, comparing 5 females and 4 males. Additionally, our 22 members in General Committee, including 17 people with disabilities, with a balanced representation of 11 females and 11 males. We aim to promote equity for persons with disabilities and other marginalized people in all aspects of life through education, training, employment, art and culture, sports, legal service, healthcare, climate change, and information and communication technology. Our executive committee meets on the regular basis to take decisions related to the project design progresses of project implementation and the aspect of the organization. Therefore, mid-levels opinions are reflected in all decision-making progress. Our organization exclusively works for people with different types of disabilities. When selecting participants for event, training session, seminar, workshop, and symposium, we ensure the participation of persons with all types of disability, like autism, physical disability, mentally illness leading with disability, visually disability, speech disability, intellectual, hearing, deafblind, cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, multiple disabilities. In our organization, the majority of board members are women and youth with disabilities that take all decisions of the organization. Currently, the organization is working with the government for the implementation of rights and protection of persons with disabilities at 2013, Global Disability Summit 2022, other disability-related laws, policy, and for making national budget inclusive for persons with disabilities. We ensure the active participation of all types of persons with disabilities in campaign.
And this is very important in terms of how you reach out into the community and develop the image of your organization, what you stand for, and the issues that you take up on local radio, local press, with local street theatre, letters in the press, using internet now, local broadcasters and radio. All of these things are important to get your message across. We're also about having dignity for ourselves and those people we work for, and therefore we do not go down the road of doing things for people as a service provider. We may provide services, but those people need not to be seen as recipients of charity, but active disabled people with decisions about the services that are being offered and how they're being offered. And this requires a flexible approach. Who can join? Well, any organization, it needs to be a majority of disabled people. In some countries, they say it has to be everybody, but of course, general comment number 7 looked at who's involved with this, and it included families of disabled people. Though we would have to say that wherever possible, we want people with learning difficulties, neurodiverse, people with mental health issues, communication issues, particularly the non-verbal, to be self-advocates and to be supported in developing their self-advocacy by the rest of the organization. Have management committees elected by the executive and the executive elected by the whole membership. And that may well be many organizations. So then who they send to those forums needs to be determined by each organization. And equally, what people stand for, what the policies are, what their track record is, needs to be important in deciding who goes forward. But there needs to be some means of deciding all of this, both who is the leadership, what the policies are, and if the rules that govern your organization, its legal structure, need to change. And so there need to be ways that can be done within the rules at an annual or a regular meeting. And there needs to be a way of calling one of those meetings if an emergency situation occurs. Very often, people have higher figures on that, not just a 50% vote, but a 2/3 vote, because it will require a change of the whole organization. Yeah, but in an ideal world, there is now no reason why everybody couldn't access social media if the wherewithal was there with the adaptations. The internet itself, Berners-Lee, who set it up, said he wanted it to be fully accessible. Of course, many companies, by the way they've developed websites and so on, put barriers there. But with speech to text and screen readers and so on, it shouldn't be that difficult for everybody to access an audio description, the internet. And indeed, one good example of the Southern African Forum of Organizations of Disabled, SAFOD, has collaborated with Microsoft to spread technology and ability how to use those in the last 4 or 5 years in their member countries for DPOs in Southern Africa. But we need to make sure that nobody is excluded. And at the moment, bandwidth, the cost of it, the cost of devices, the cost of packages to actually be on the internet all exclude people. And so we need to use other things like local citizen band radio, which can be free to access. We need to think of other ways which are not print-based, which will be there for some people, but at the same time, we will need a print-based version for people who can't hear. So what is accountability? The first step is making an organization accountable, is agreeing what it expects of its members, its elected officials, paid staff, but also unpaid staff. And usually the board is supervising the secretariat, which is the paid staff, and making sure, and therefore they are employers often in our larger DPOs and have to take on the role of being an employer, fair and equal treatment of employees, being able to take on those roles. So this requires electing people with the experience to be able to take those roles. In theory, each elected official and paid and unpaid member of staff should be accountable to all the members all of the time, but that just isn't practical. And so we have to have these structures which inevitably introduce hierarchies, but it's therefore very important that the people who run for leadership in these organizations put themselves forward and are accountable for what they are actually doing. We cannot go forward, as Scada mentioned, under 4.3 and 33.3 of the UNCRPD to governments and say, you're implementing the UNCRPD. We, the DPOs, are the representative voice of disabled people. And thus our leitmotif, our main method of doing that is to go forward to make sure that we are the representative voice. And it's how we get these structures right that we need to think about that. So an example of how we can actually look at that is using what we call a SWOT analysis, which is strengths, weakness, opportunities, and threats. So a strength might be that we have 5 strong disabled people with different impairments and experiences, have a place to meet. This is your very small organization. Some campaign experience, members who can draw posters, member with a car, members of our committee have lots of time and to spare. Weakness, no deaf members, no neurodiverse members, no people who are self-advocates with learning difficulties, few women in senior positions. Transport is a problem for everybody. No one has financial experience. None of our committee has much time, no opportunities for information. So by doing this, the board would need to see where the gaps are in what they're doing, what their strengths are, and then shore up their weaknesses. And it leads to an action plan which deals with these issues. But you can also identify where you might go to come up with solutions for these weaknesses. So the opportunities might be talking to the local municipality, going to find a sponsor from a local business, setting up projects which might well work with that business so that you provide disability advice and they provide funding to you. Funding available in the community, leadership training might all be opportunities. Threats to what we're doing, apart from those global threats that Scada mentioned at the beginning, that NGOs not run by disabled people are attracting all the funding is a very big threat and a continuing one, though we've begun to challenge that in guidance that particularly I would recommend looking at the guidance of the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office in the UK, their 10-year plan for disabled people, which is on the internet, which was shaped very much by Commonwealth Disabled People's Organisation saying, you're funding all the NGOs, you should be funding us. And they have shifted in their focus to fund disabled people's organisations directly. And I think you may all benefit from that in the future. So that could be a threat, but it could be turned into an opportunity. Professionals who have been trained in rehabilitative medicines and other social care resent our intervention and they have the wrong attitude. So we have to break that down to challenge them and to train them in actually co-production. Leadership training is essential. What makes a good leader? A deep interest in the aims of the organization, genuine interest in the people who make up the organization, active ambition, but you also need skills. You need to have some sort of charisma. You can't hide your light under a bushel. And if people, because of the way they've been treated in life, they need empowerment training to bring themselves out of themselves, to develop as leaders, personal qualities that influence and inspire people. You need good communication skills. Coming at democracy from another end, we've got the Commonwealth Charter, which is a document of values and aspirations which unite Commonwealth. Commonwealth is 2/5 of the world's population, over 2.5 billion people, 450 million of them disabled people, created the Charter in 2012, 6 years after the UNCRPD was there. And unfortunately, in this Commonwealth Charter, there is nothing about disabled people. It talks about vulnerable people and hard to reach people, but it never mentions us. We, of course, support all the values as the Commonwealth Disabled People's Forum. We are an accredited organisation and therefore have to support these values: democracy, human rights, international peace and security, tolerance, respect and understanding, freedom of expression, which is essential for a democracy, separation of powers, by which we mean the integration or separation of the legislature, the executive and the judiciary, And there have been a number of moves around the world recently for the executive to take away the powers of the judiciary, to say, no, 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 the courts must listen to us. We're the elected leaders. But that isn't the rule of law. And so the promotion and protection of fundamental human rights and good governance, sustainable development, protecting the environment, access to health, education, food and shelter, gender equality, importance of young people being involved in it, recognition of needs of small states, vulnerable states, and the role of civil societies, of which we are one part in the Commonwealth. However, since becoming an accredited organisation, it has become very obvious to us in the Commonwealth Disabled People's Forum that unlike the United Nations, that some years after the UN Convention had gone through, by 2019, they had a functioning protocol, a disability protocol, which changed the whole way that they functioned and made sure that there were disabled speakers at all meetings, that there was accessibility, that venues were chosen in a way that everybody could do. We have found, and unfortunately that is our experience, that that does not happen in the Commonwealth. So we would like you to look as part of this at the Commonwealth Disability Inclusion Protocol and Strategy, which we are working hard to get all governments over the next 9 months up until CHOGM, the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Samoa in October of this year, to adopt this as a freestanding thing. Now, the Secretary General, when we raised this in the Commonwealth, said, oh, well, it would be better to mainstream all of this. But we say that doesn't work for disability, because it's not like gender where it can just be part of it, or youth, or different minorities. We need a twin track approach. We need to be included across everything, but we also need reasonable accommodation, support and adjustments for specific impairments. And therefore we say that there needs to be a separate standing disability inclusion protocol and strategy in the Commonwealth. So your activity E is to think of ways that you can actually do that. Particularly for us in the Commonwealth, Article 29 of the Convention, participation in political and public life, is crucial. And the next thing of how we ensure democracy is about how we actually get people to exercise those rights.
All people need to be able to exercise their right to speak out, their right to vote, their right to make their voices heard. Oftentimes, physical barriers, attitudinal barriers, and policy barriers really prevent people with disabilities to be full participants in our society. My name is Alice Wong. There are still a lot of barriers that people with disabilities face in political participation. For example, in 2012, over 30% of people with disabilities reported difficulty voting, compared to 8% of non-disabled people. People with disabilities are still facing numerous barriers, whether it's at the polling station, whether it's filling out an absentee ballot, or whether they're even allowed to vote, because there are people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, many of whom are under guardianship for various reasons. Many judges bar people under guardianship from voting, and I think that's another huge human rights issue. They may need assistance with decision making, but that doesn't mean they don't have an idea of who they want to vote for, or, a desire to vote for somebody. People with disabilities have a voice, whether it's an actual literal voice or not. People have thoughts, people have desires, people want to be involved. That's the work that needs to be done.
So do read that convention, but it's not just about access to the electoral system, and you'll see a couple of films about that and the barriers that still exist, but also it's about how we get people to stand. Skada mentioned there is one disabled member of parliament in Malawi, and they aim in the 25 election to get more. All of us should be aiming to get more disabled representation. Is unless you continually fight and are vigilant even though they've been agreed by government and political parties, oh yes, we want to be accessible, we want to include everybody, it gets off the boil. So who is the ginger group that keeps them on their toes? It is our DPOs, and therefore we need to observe elections, and you'll see a film from Kenya about an observer of the elections there. They had some riots back in 10 years ago, and therefore it was very important to see that that didn't happen again. And so observation of elections are very important.
Okay, could you please tell us your name and where you're from?
My name is Stanley Mutuma. I'm from Nairobi, that is the capital of Kenya in East Africa.
Okay, and what kind of work are you doing around elections?
Basically, I'm an election observer, or we can call monitoring the elections for the United Disabled Persons of Kenya, that is the UDPK, in collaboration with IFES.
Mm-hmm. And what kind of barriers are you finding that people who are blind or have low vision are encountering?
What I can talk about basically are two types of barriers. The first barrier I'll be referred to as the barrier to information or access to information, because you realize that for one to make a proper and informed decision, one must have access to the correct information pertaining the elections. That is in terms of the candidates they want to vote for, which parties they stand for, their manifestos, the particular timelines, or even for one to participate either as a voter or as an aspirant, because you have to know all this information, and sometimes maybe it is not available in accessible format, that is through the braille or through soft copy, or maybe the websites of the political parties may not be very accessible. Mm-hmm. So those are some of the areas we are working with the polling agency in Kenya, which is known as the IEBC, Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission, and the political parties and other stakeholders to ensure that this information is accessible to persons who are print disabled or visually challenged.
And what are your hopes for these upcoming elections?
Our hopes is that these elections will be free, fair and credible, just like it is stipulated in our laws under the Constitution and other statutes like the Elections Act and the Political Parties Act and other regulations pertaining to elections. And this, we believe that it is a constitutional right for every person to exercise it, to choose the leader of their choice. So we deem that we need to have a proper election free from violence and free from intimidation, and the IEBC together with other stakeholders has to ensure that voting stations are accessible to all persons, including persons with disability. And that's why it is fundamental for us to work in a collaborative partnership with all the stakeholders involved in the elections to ensure our representation.
And why do you think it's important for people with disabilities to participate in political life?
I think it is very important and fundamental for them to participate, because the leaders they put into office will have a direct bearing on them. For instance, if they don't put proper leaders, then these leaders will not have their interest at heart. But if they put their leaders that they have chosen for themselves, they will have their interest at heart, and they'll be able to put in place policies, regulations, and ensure that they will perform oversight that will ensure the institutions mandated to make life easier for persons with disability, or to even the ground, will be able to implement these laws. That's why we deem that it's important to put people who will have our interest at heart.
Anything else you'd like to add?
Yes, I would like to say that we are happy that stakeholders like IFES and others are working together to give us to provide support in terms of technical and other types of support to ensure that persons with disability are included in these particular elections. So we say thank you to IFES and other stakeholders who are working with us.
Thank you.
How we take this into involving ordinary disabled citizens in the day-to-day process, particularly at the local level, the lowest level where government functions, which is handing out support and providing accommodation, food, welfare, health to people, and indeed education and employment opportunities. How does that actually work? So an interesting project, which you can see a bit of on the film, is Nothing About Disabled People Without Disabled People, which was carried out from 2015 to 2017 by disabled people, a commission of 10 local disabled people in the London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham.
Hello, my name is Councillor Sue Fenimore and I'm the Deputy Leader of Hammersmith and Fulham Council. I'm delighted to be able to talk to you about the Nothing About Disabled People Without Disabled People report, which was published in June 2018. It sets out the clear case for co-producing policies and services with disabled residents to address the many barriers disabled people experience and to deliver on our vision of Hammersmith and Fulham being the most inclusive and the most accessible borough in the country. As a council, we are fully committed to co-production with disabled residents. Co-production means disabled people and decision makers working in partnership. We're working together to plan, design and review policy and services that affect disabled residents' lives to remove the barriers they face. As well as co-production, the Council is also committed to taking the social model of disability approach. People with impairments are disabled by the barriers they face in society. And so we focus on removing these barriers, recognising that people are disabled by physical, attitudinal, economic and environmental barriers in society. Therefore, the focus should undoubtedly be on removing those barriers. In December 2015, on the International Day of Disabled People, Hammersmith and Fulham Council agreed to work together with disabled residents. We took the opportunity to set up what we believe was the first local Disabled People's Commission in the country. The Commission worked together to build the culture that values, respects and delivers equal rights for disabled people living in Hammersmith and Fulham. All 10 of the Disabled People's Commissioners live in Hammersmith and Fulham and are disabled people who have faced many different barriers in their daily lives, an invaluable insight into the lived experience of disabled people. They all gave their time for free and their considerable commitment is testament to the success of the Commission. In this video, we will summarise the work of the Disabled People's Commission, the report findings and recommendations, and what we're doing to implement them.
Hello, my name's Tara Flood. I'm a disabled resident of Hammersmith and Fulham. I also chaired the Disabled People's Commission, which has been groundbreaking in terms of the work that we did and our vision. The publication of the Nothing About Disabled People Without Disabled People report in June 2018 has signalled a shift in culture and practice in Hammersmith and Fulham. I'm going to take you through the work of the Disabled People's Commission, its key findings and recommendations. In stage 1, we looked at research and examples of co-production. And in stage 2, we ran surveys to find out what disabled people in Hammersmith and Fulham thought. We also did surveys of councillors and council staff. In stage 3, we ran meetings and events to get information about disabled people's experiences of decision-making and co-production in the borough. And then in stage 4, we used all of that information to write a report with our findings and recommendations, at the same time as working towards a co-production way of working for all policy that affects disabled people. There are 3 areas that we think needed to be looked at first. For independent living, we think that the council should co-produce an independent living strategy with disabled people. That strategy should be for disabled people of all ages. There should be a new Preparing for Adulthood team that brings together children's services and adult social care. This work should be co-produced with young disabled people as well as their families. This work should also be part of an independent living strategy. On housing, the Council has already started on better housing for disabled people. A disabled people's housing strategy has been co-produced and the implementation work is underway. And then the development of Hammersmith Town Hall and the surrounding area as a civic campus. This work is already being co-produced with disabled people to make sure that it has the highest levels of inclusive design. This means making sure that the space will be accessible to all residents. The key findings from the report are firstly that many local disabled people have said that their quality of life has gone down and that they are keen to work with the council to change this. Secondly, a number of disabled people have felt excluded from local decision making. And then thirdly, it is clear that councillors and staff want to work better with disabled residents. There are 8 recommendations in the Nothing About Disabled People Without Disabled People report. The first recommendation states that the council should use a human rights way of working. This means working in a way that enables and informs people about their human rights and how to use them. The second recommendation states that there needs to be a commitment to embedding co-production across all council departments with an action plan to make sure this happens. The third recommendation states that council staff and disabled residents need training and support to be ready to co-produce changes in policies and services. The fourth recommendation states that there needs to be a communication plan that sets out how we tell people about co-production and how they can be involved. The fifth recommendation states that local services need to be run in a way that local disabled people need them to, and that a service quality framework is created to help this happen. The sixth recommendation states that funding needs to be identified to ensure co-production with disabled residents can happen. The seventh recommendation states that for successful co-production to happen with disabled residents, it's vital to support local disabled people's organisations to be stronger and to be better resourced. The last and eighth recommendation highlights the need for progress towards the implementation of co-production with disabled residents to be monitored and evaluated. This is to check how it's going and to make any necessary changes where needed.
Disabled residents know best about the services they want and need. That's why we're working with disabled residents to implement the recommendations from this report. We've set up a co-production implementation group, which includes disabled residents, councillors, and senior officers working together. This will provide the leadership to make co-production work and support its development across the borough and the work of the council. Thank you.
That's the lowest level of local authority governance in cities. And they put forward co-production, which was that the council officers should work with disabled people, listen to disabled people, to actually start implementing many of the parts of the UNCRPD.